Right, hi guys, back with another video. So today's video, how can you cut your insulin needs, or the amount of insulin that you actually use on a daily basis? This is actually pretty simple, and it's called a plant-based diet. So let's break it down first though. So before we get into it, let's ask ourselves, what is type 1 diabetes and what is type 2? So let's start with type 2. So type 2, for the vast majority of people who suffer from it, it is essentially a condition caused by food, specifically meat, fish, chicken, eggs, milk, dairy, animal products, and some processed junk food on top. And type 2 is basically a condition where the person has all this animal fat in their body, and it basically inhibits the insulin bringing the sugar into the cell. So what happens is the blood sugars then rise. So type 2 diabetes, for the majority of people who have it, it isn't a carbohydrate issue, it is a fat issue that causes insulin resistance. So let's move on then. So type 1 diabetes, what is that? So type 1 diabetes is where the person has an autoimmune condition where their immune system attacks the beta cells in the pancreas, destroys them, and then the person is no longer capable excuse me, the person is no longer capable of producing insulin. So what happens is they have no insulin in their blood anymore, so therefore their sugars then rise because there's no insulin to physically bring the sugar into the cell. So that's a very brief snapshot of type 1 and type 2. So where does insulin resistance and plant-based diets come into this? So we just saw that type 2 is basically a issue of, or condition of insulin resistance caused by animal products. So why am I talking about type 1 as well? So I'm type 1, and basically even though type 1 is caused by an autoimmune condition, type 1s can still be insulin resistant. So to give you an example, back in November 2014, I was on an insulin to carbohydrate ratio of 1 to 10. That means that for each unit of insulin, I needed, for each 10 grams of carbohydrates I consumed, I needed 1 unit of insulin, so 1 to 10. And when I went plant-based, what happened is I went very quickly from a ratio of 1 to 10 to 1 to 35. So I went from a situation where I needed 1 unit for 10 grams of carbs to a situation where I only needed 1 unit for about 35 grams of carbs. So I cut my insulin needs by 2/3. So how is that I was insulin resistant? The same as how type 2s are, but perhaps to a lesser extent. So basically there, guys, so type 2 is an insulin resistance issue for the overwhelming vast majority of people who have it. Some people, a small percentage, it is generally genetic. And type 1 is about the person's pancreas no longer producing insulin, but that person, if they're eating the standard Western diet, they can be insulin resistant. So how do you cut your insulin? Well, I just told you then, guys, a plant-based diet. So if you're watching this and you're type 1 or type 2 diabetic, the answer to your problem is a high carb, low fat, low protein, high fiber, whole food, plant-based vegan diet. So a diet that's based upon plants where the majority of the calories come from carbohydrates, small amounts come from fat and protein, and you have no animal products in your diet, none whatsoever. No meat, no fish, no chicken, no eggs, no milk, no dairy, no animal products of any kind. Now then, for a lot of you, you're probably thinking this is a load of rubbish, this can't be true. My recommendation to you is Google the doctors I'm about to tell you, Dr. Neil Barnard and Dr. John McDougall. They have really good websites, they have a really good YouTube presence. They will explain the science in a lot more detail to you. They might not cover type 1, but if you type 1, just listen to it, because insulin resistance is something you can have. So to go into it then, guys, so if you're currently in a situation where, let's say you've got let's say a bad insulin to carbohydrate ratio, let's say 1 to 10 or even less, say if you're having to use a lot of insulin, you need to ask yourself why. And the answer is always usually insulin resistance. So like I said, if you're eating all these animal products, what happens is it means you need more insulin. So let's say if you even if you eat a small amount, it still has an impact. So you can't be half-hearted with it. You can't think, well, I'll eat mainly a plant-based diet, but I will still have some milk, I'll still have some meat. It doesn't work that way. Any amount above 0 will have a negative impact in your health. So going back to November 2014, I was on a ratio of 1 to 10. And at the time, I was only having about 200 millilitres of milk for cereal each day at breakfast. About 2 times a week, I think I would have chicken from the local supermarket. I'd get rice and chicken curry. And there might have been 1 or 2 times at home I might have had some. So for me, well, compared to, let's say, the average, American, that isn't to pick on American people, but in the US, the average person probably has meat like 2, possibly 3 times a day, or animal products 3 times a day, because the way the standard American diet is. So compared to, say, the average person out there, I wasn't having that much animal products, but the amount I was having still was holding me back from cutting my insulin significantly. So like I said, I went from 1 to 10 to 1 to 35, so I cut my insulin needs per a given amount of carbohydrates by 2/3. So to give you another example, guys, so in your insulin pen, I got to the stage where one of them would last me about 3 weeks, or even slightly over 3 weeks, I think. And I wasn't eating a small amount of carbs. I was eating 500-700 grams a day. When I was cycling in the summer, I would sometimes eat 1,000 grams of carbs. I think the most I've eaten in a day is about 1,200, and I hardly needed that much insulin, relatively speaking. So I hope that was useful. Remember, carbs are not your enemy. Carbs in no way, shape or form cause type 1 or type 2. Carbs logically do not cause blood sugar to rise unhealthily. So blood sugars always rise, with carbs, but that's, naturally in a normal person they will see a natural rise. But when you see an unhealthy rise, the answer isn't that it's the carbs itself, it's something else. So it's either the person who's type 1 isn't using insulin correctly, or the person who's type 1 or type 2 is consuming the animal products, which causes the insulin resistance, which means that the insulin isn't as effective, which means that the blood sugars go up. So where to take it from here? So so hopefully now you sort of realise, or starting to get the idea, that it's the animal products and the high fat that are the problem, that can cause the insulin resistance. So where do you take it from here? It isn't enough just to know that it's the problem. You need to know the solution. Well, my recommendation here, guys, is go to a high carb, low fat, low protein, high fiber, whole food, plant-based diet. What does that mean? That means that you have no animal products, like I just said, but you center your diet upon plants. So what are plants? Well, plants means anything that is a plant or comes from plants. So rice, grains, fruits, vegetables, legumes, beans, seeds, nuts, whole foods essentially. And that is the kind of food you want to base your entire diet on. It will give you the energy you need to live life, full of plenty of carbohydrates to give you energy. Has low amounts of fat and low amounts of protein. And the thing to understand here is, a lot of people make this mistake. You don't need a lot of fat and you don't need a lot of protein. Fat is predominantly used by your body, to make hormones. Man uses fat, I think, to make testosterone and other hormones. I think it uses fat to make cholesterol, and a few other things, and it uses it in the construction of the cell wall. And the point I'm trying to make is, you only need a couple of percent of your calories to come from fat. You don't need a lot, and all the fat that you need you'll pretty much find in plant foods quite easily. You don't need more than 10% of your daily calories to come from fat, and eating a plant-based diet, it's roughly going to be about 10%, well, about 7 to 10%. So the next stumbling block is, you're probably watching this and thinking, what about protein? where do you think all these animals that the people eat get protein from? It ultimately comes from vegetables, ultimately comes from grass. And you need very small amounts of protein. Ask yourself, how many people do you personally know that have died, are dying, or currently suffer from the following diseases: heart disease, cancer, diabetes, osteoporosis, obesity, Alzheimer's, atherosclerosis, dementia, irritable bowel syndrome, obesity, Crohn's. Have I missed anything out? I'll repeat myself. So ask yourself, how many people do you know that have had, currently suffering from, or died from these conditions? And then ask yourself, how many people over here do you know who have protein deficiency? How many people do you know who've died from protein deficiency? It doesn't happen. It's not possible. The only way you could ever be deficient in protein is if you were eating, a famine diet, 1,600 calories a day or less. These starvation diets. If you're in a concentration camp, if you're eating a sufficient amount of calories to fuel your body on a plant-based diet, you'll get all the protein you need. The World Health Organization recommendation for protein is 42 grams, and when they said that was a minimum level that you need to hit just to survive. That is a level at which the vast majority of people in society can hit, and be adequately fine with protein. So the reason why they set it at 42 is because when they looked at a graph with a bell curve of people's protein requirements, 42 grams was at the higher end. That means that some people were, sort of in the middle. They only needed about 20 grams a day. Perhaps like women or children or people with less mass, people who perhaps are a little less active, and basically you don't need these high amounts of protein. So let's say if you're watching this and you're a bodybuilder, you're into powerlifting, let's say if you're a labourer and you're picking heavy stuff up day, you're going to break more muscle tissue down than the average person. But in addition to that, you're also going to be eating more calories than the average person, and consequently the amount of protein you'll be eating will be higher. So let's say if you have someone that's just 2,000 calories a day, and they get 10% of their calories therefore from protein, that would eat camera cut out. So that would mean you'd be getting about 200 calories from protein. But let's say if you have someone that's working out, they're going to be getting about they might be on, say, 4,000 calories a day. So based on the same plant-based diet, where roughly 10% of the calories come from protein, that person's going to be getting about 400 calories of protein, which is 100 grams of protein. Which is, so straight away that person there is getting about 2.5 times roughly the amount of protein the World Health Organization recommends. So I know there's a bit of a ramble on there, guys. Might not have been as coherent as I liked, but I hope that made sense. Remember, carbs are not the enemy. Carbs are never the enemy. Carbs are the solution. And when I say that, I always mean carbs in a whole food plant form, not processed junk food, but fresh fruits, grains, rice, potatoes, starch. That's what I'm on about. So if you want to cut your insulin, it's quite simple. Cause insulin sensitivity in your body, make your body go sensitive, stop eating animal products. I know it's going to be hard. Recommendation, subscribe to me, and I'll request that I do more videos to help you. Let me know why it's hard for you, what the stumbling blocks are. Is it breakfast, is it dinner, is it tea, is it family? Do you not know what to buy? Do you not know what to cook? Do you not know how? Just let me know and I'll make a video on it, or I'll respond to you in the comments. I promise I'll answer you in either way, and I'll give you advice. So I hope that was useful. Remember, so insulin sensitivity, that is how you reduce your insulin needs. So high carb, low fat, low protein, high fiber, whole food, plant-based, no animal products. And the last point I want to make, guys, is you want to cut back on your insulin. So if you followed my advice, 100%, you need to be prepared to back down on your insulin. And the reason why is because you become more sensitive and you're achieving what you're setting out to do, which is use less insulin. So you need to be aware of that ahead of time. So as soon as you cut animal products out of your body, and you need to do it, you need to commit to this, guys, 100%. As soon as you do it, very quickly your body will become sensitive and that ratio will improve. So if you're on 1 to 3, it'll quickly go to 1 to 6, or you'll see it go to 1 to 9, 1 to 12. You'll see it begin to improve and go like that, which is what you want. So if you don't take this into account and you keep on using the same amount of insulin while you go to adopt a plant-based diet, there's a strong chance you're going to get hypoglycemic attacks, which is what happened to me, because when I went on a plant-based diet, I didn't know it caused insulin sensitivity, which meant I needed less insulin. So advice for that, guys: if you're going to follow this advice and adopt high carb, low fat, low protein, plant-based, start to go to your doctor first, or perhaps contact Dr. John McDougall or Dr. Neil Bernard. Check out their material, check out their websites, take the decision for yourself based upon what they say as well. In addition to me, I'll put links in the description below. I'll try to find some videos of theirs as well for you to watch, because they are pretty good on this. So be prepared to cut your insulin back. Be consciously aware of it, and make sure you always have backup sugar somewhere. So make sure you've got something sugary at home, you've got something sugary in your car, your place of work, and perhaps let your colleagues know. I mean, don't be scared, don't be ashamed of it. Just say, guys, I'm trying out a new diet to try and cut back my insulin. If you see me being a bit funny or whatever, my blood sugar might be low, just to make you aware. Tell people what you're doing, and always be conscious that of your blood sugars. Perhaps test a bit more often as well. And I've done another video on here called the symptoms of low blood sugars, which I'll leave a link to. I hope you go and watch that, because it'll give you some really good pointers to watch out for. So if you're already diabetic, you probably already experienced them, but it's good to refresh your memory with what they are if you haven't had them recently. And you may not have necessarily experienced all of the symptoms of low blood sugars, because there can be many. So hope that was useful. So just to quickly repeat myself, because I know I'm rambling on: you want to cut your insulin, plant-based diet is the way. No animal products, cut it out, high carb. And if you're going to do it 100% and you're going to fully commit to this, just be aware that you need to cut back on your insulin as you become more sensitive. So keep an eye on those blood sugars daily, regularly. Make sure they're not getting too low, and start to cut back in your insulin. And if you want to go to your doctor and have a word with them, and definitely check out Dr. Neil Bernard and Dr. John McDougall. And if you want to, Dr. Michael Greger at nutritionfacts.org. He does an amazing website on diabetes, everything, but he covers diabetes. And if you watch his videos, he'll do a much better job than me. And in convincing you that the plant-based diet is the way. So I hope that was useful, guys. Sorry if it's a bit long, sorry if I rambled on a bit there. I hope that was useful. Please put your comments below. What do you think? What are your experiences? Are you type 1 and type 2 who's gone plant-based? Let me know, share your story. And if you see anyone in the comments who's struggling, I'm going to always promise I'll respond to them, but put your story as well. You have the power to help them. So I hope that was useful, guys. All the best. Until next time, God bless, and I'll see you soon. Bye bye now. Right, hi guys, back with another video. So today's video: how can you cut your insulin needs, or the amount of insulin that you actually use on a daily basis? This is actually pretty simple, and it's called a plant-based diet. So let's break it down first though. So before we get into it, let's ask ourselves, what is type 1 diabetes and what is type 2? So let's start with type 2. Longer capable excuse me. A person is no longer capable of producing insulin. So what happens is they have no insulin in their blood anymore, so therefore their sugars then rise, because there's no insulin to physically bring the sugar into the cell. So that's a very brief snapshot of type 1 and type 2. So where does insulin resistance and plant-based diets come into this? So we just saw that type 2 is basically a issue of, or condition of, insulin resistance caused by animal products. So why am I talking about type 1 as well? So I'm type 1, and basically, even though type 1 is caused by an autoimmune condition, type 1s can still be insulin resistant. So to give you an example, back in November 2014, I was on so type 2, for the vast majority of people who suffer from it, it is essentially a condition caused by food, specifically meat, fish, chicken, eggs, milk, dairy, animal products, and some processed junk food on top. And type 2 is basically a condition where the person has all this animal fat in their body, and it basically inhibits the insulin bringing the sugar into the cell. So what happens is the blood sugars then rise. So type 2 diabetes, for the majority of people who have it, it isn't a carbohydrate issue, it is a fat issue that causes insulin resistance. So let's move on then. So type 1 diabetes, what is that? So type 1 diabetes is where the person has an autoimmune condition where their immune system attacks the beta cells in the pancreas, destroys them, and then the person is no longer